Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Amanda Elam for this conversation about entrepreneurship. Dr. Elam is the founder, co-founder, and CEO of Galaxy Diagnostics, an early-stage medical diagnostics company in North Carolina, advancing diagnostics and clinical discovery for emerging infectious diseases like Lyme disease. She also serves as a business advisor to a number of innovative life sciences startups, NGOs supporting women entrepreneurs, and appears regularly on panels and podiums at industry and global research conferences. She holds a doctorate in sociology from UNC Chapel Hill. On a personal level, I've known Dr. Elam for more than a decade and consider her a good professional friend. Amanda, welcome and thank you for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we have a wonderful audience, Amanda. They've already given me a list of questions that they want me to ask you, but I'll start with my question, which is, can you tell us more about your business? What exactly is your business?
Okay. So the name of my company is Galaxy Diagnostics. We're a spin out from the North Carolina State College of Veterinary Medicine. And we are advancing, very simply, we're advancing DNA testing and antigen testing for elusive, hard to diagnose infections linked to chronic illness. And so Lyme disease is an example. Cat scratch disease is another example. Nobody knows the pathogen names, but it's Lyme borrelia and cat scratch disease bacteria is Bartonella. And there are a handful of other pathogens that are transmitted by vectors that are very difficult to detect, but have been implicated in a lot of diseases affecting the brain, the heart, the joints, and other body systems.
Okay. And how did the business start? This is not your typical, when we ask students what sort of business you want to start, somebody says a bar, a restaurant, typical sort of undergraduate business. This is not one of those. What got you to start this business? How did it start?
Well, there's my role in it, and then there's how the business started even before I showed up. My co-founders at the College of Veterinary Medicine, Dr. Ed Breitschwert and Dr. Ricardo Maggi, they have a cool story. So the first business plan was actually developed by Dr. Breitschwert's oldest son, Brett, and another student when they were at UNC. They were both in grad school. Brett was in law school, and his friend Jonathan Owens was doing his MBA at UNC Chapel Hill. And they got involved in a program on campus called Launch the Venture, and they needed a business idea. So Brett went to his dad and said, hey, you're working on some cool innovations in infectious disease. Is there anything that I can write a business plan around? And he said, sure, here's this technology we're developing that increases sensitivity of DNA testing. And, this was for Bartonella. This is an infection that, affects people and animals, and gave them the 411 on that, and they ran with it. So they developed the first business plan, the first pitch. They won the business plan competition. And one of the judges in the competition was actually an old friend of mine, Chris Kelly, who went up to them afterwards and said, I think there's a real business here. So he got involved and started, and then pulled me in. I was teaching at the College of Management at NC State at the time, and he looped me in and said, hey, these guys need some help. And that's how I got involved.
Wonderful. So it seems that participating in these business plan competitions in college is actually useful.
It can be very useful. Yes.
Wonderful. So the next question is from one of the wonderful students we have in this class, Maddie. And Maddie, I would like you to ask your question directly. Maddie has a really interesting question about how being an entrepreneur has affected you. So Maddie?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask how being an entrepreneur has affected your life, like how you look at things in life and in like your everyday life and business as well.
So, well, I'll say, Maddie, that entrepreneurship, I discovered that in my 20s as my why. I came out of school, I had no idea what to do with my life. I happened to stumble into a job at a well-funded enterprise software company. And I became fascinated with how companies are developed, how they are started by a group of people, how people get along, how they make it happen. But even more largely, how do you bring an innovation to the marketplace and convince a market to do things in a way that they haven't traditionally done it? And I'll say that early life experience really changed my perspective on the world. I think a lot about social change now, right? I think a lot about, how we come together as groups to accomplish things, but also how we transform the world around us with our goals, with the strategy, with the actual approach we take to getting a new technology out there, or maybe it's changing the way people do things through a nonprofit, or clubs, or whatever organizations we're developing.
Wonderful. Amanda, it's hard for me to believe that when you came out of college, you didn't know what you wanted to do. I've always seen you as someone who is so well planned, so organized, and always knows what she wants.
Not the case. I too was a clueless 22-year-old once upon a time.
Well, it's hard for me to believe that, like I said, but we all have a life before we got to know each other. So yeah. When you first started discussing with people around you that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you wanted to be a co-founder, you wanted to be involved in starting businesses or the business, what was the reaction of people around you?
I would say
Parents,
mixed. Yeah,
friends, yeah.
definitely mixed. I will tell you that my father and my husband are my two biggest champions. They really get it because they both love innovation. My dad's an engineer, and my husband started his career as a software engineer. And we met at that first startup. So they've always been very supportive and really kind of understood the fascination. I think the rest of my family thought I was bonkers. It's high risk. It's very stressful. I have 3 kids, so I went on to become a mom, and I think my mom and actually my father-in-law were probably the 2 most critical people. And they didn't always do it in a tear me down way. It was more like worrying about all the time. Like, are you spending enough time with your kids? How are you getting sleep at night? How can you pull this off? Are you taking care of yourself? You work all the time. Stop working all the time. And so that's what I would say a mix. I think my friend group, I think I have a lot of friends who are off doing crazy things. But I've always surrounded myself with a lot of people who were very adventurous, Vishal, like you, and great colleagues in entrepreneurship. After I did my first, 4 or 5 years in that enterprise software startup, I went to grad school. Right. That's where I really kind of built out my network of people who shared my fascination with starting and growing businesses and transforming marketplaces.
So grad school is where you found your footing? Is that what?
I think I found my why in the software company, but I think I found my community in grad school.
Got it. And when you started this business and running it, what were some of the major challenges you faced? You said you were married by the time this happened, you had kids. Even, outside of that, what were some of the challenges you faced?
Well, I think of those as 2 different challenges, right? They're the business challenges because we ended up choosing emerging infectious disease, which meant that we had a solution for a problem that wasn't well defined in the marketplace. And as an entrepreneurship professor, scholar at the time, I recognized that as, we're really doing emergent market here, that it was going to be a lot of market development, that this wasn't a bigger, better, faster kind of, we're going to raise a ton of money and all of a sudden own anything, that we were going to have to deal. We were dealing with a very complex marketplace. So medicine, very difficult to change clinical behavior. We had very early evidence. We have rising standards of evidence for clinical discoveries. So I would say in the business challenges, I realized very early that this was a long path, that this was really going to end up being more of a social venture. I knew we'd have to partner with advocacy. On the personal side, I would say the financial uncertainty has been very challenging. Sometimes I pay myself, sometimes I don't. I managed that by continuing, to teach at the university on a part-time basis and do research. So I have an appointment that pays a little bit helps keep my husband from, divorcing me. And so I think the financial uncertainty was really challenging. The kid thing was tough, you guys. I have to say, I never missed a practice. I never missed a tournament. I never missed a performance. I was definitely 100% on as a mom. My husband traveled a lot for his job, so it was a really heavy load. And, but my kids really pushed back over the years, right? My daughter still jokes that I chose a startup over my kids, because it's all consuming, right? And that was very challenging. And then I would say the third thing on the professional side, like personal side of things is, I like data. I like sitting in a room and analyzing data and writing papers. That's like my favorite thing in the world. And that's not what you need to do as a CEO. So there was a whole sort of transformation, I would say, of my own personality that was necessitated in the startup process. I had to learn how to be more extroverted. I had to learn how to, drive conversations. I had to learn how to sell. It just, I'm not sure I've perfected it yet, but I definitely present as much more outgoing than I think I am by nature.
So, Amanda, in class, we talk about part-time entrepreneurship. Phil Knight of Nike started as a part-time entrepreneur. And we talk about the challenges, right? You have a job and you do part-time entrepreneurship. In your case, you have a full-time family, a job, and a business. So you really have sort of three things you're juggling. How has that worked out?
Been exhausting.
Okay.
Been absolutely exhausting. That said, it's been a wild ride. It's like the best adventure in the world. I think that, when I think about the way people around me reacted, they think I'm crazy. We're super accomplished, and it doesn't feel that way, right? Day to day. And what I have learned over that process is that it's, I think founder mental health, if you guys haven't talked about it in the class already, is a really important emerging area of research and entrepreneurship studies. And I think it's incredibly important. I have learned that I have to take care of myself, my physical health, my mental health. I've learned things about myself, like I'm an incredibly resilient person. I literally experience the stress physically before I experience it mentally. And that means I'm always pushing the envelope, and I've pushed it too far at times. And so, where then I have to recover from exhaustion, and I still have a to-do list that's long as a mile. So I think that's really important for everyone to hear as well, is that, entrepreneurship is challenging. It's very lonely. Sometimes you definitely need, your community around you, and you need balance. Like literally the best ideas come when I'm doing something that is not my job. It's when I'm out, if I was leading a school trip with my kids, or I'm hanging out with a bunch of friends. I like to kayak. I'm very outdoorsy. If I'm out boating, sometimes it's being in the middle of freaking nowhere, surrounded by nature and wildlife. And that's when all of a sudden ideas appear. And so learning how to balance out the work demands, keep your health a priority, and also embrace the, the personal, anything you do that's about you and about connecting with inspiration. I think that's where actually really powers, where you get the best ideas, and it actually powers your leadership.
And Amanda, I have to admit that I do not do a good job in the class of talking about the mental health challenges. We have a chapter in the book. I usually skip that chapter, but now that you've brought it up, I'm going to spend a few minutes in class during one of the classes to talk about mental health challenges that entrepreneurs face, even very successful ones.
Yeah, and I think the paradigm that I like the most, Vishal, I'm connected with the community, doing a lot of research and also some outreach on this. I have a friend, Aaron Houghton, who was one of the co-founders of Eye Contact and had a really big exit and went public with his story, but he had a very close call. He crashed and burned after the exit, like where he no longer had his why, right? He accomplished his life goal. What do you do now? And he started a company called Founders First System. He has an app called Dory, as in a lifeboat, Dory, and that he developed to connect a community and build a community of founders who just have a place to go every week to talk about what's challenging and what's not challenging. What I love about his model, though, you guys, is that it's all based on this idea of peakability and high performance. Right. So his experience of the entrepreneurship journey and having to be in tip-top health and mental health and physical health, he really saw himself in elite athletes and in high performing Air Force pilots and people doing these incredible physically demanding, mentally demanding occupations where the mental health and the physical health practices are what drive the high performance. And so he's trying to bring that to the business startup world. His argument is founders, we literally, it's so overwhelming and we stretch ourselves so far that we need those same peakability practices, right? Whether it's conditioning, it's connection, it's making sure that our personal identities are anchored in something other than our business. So if the business fails, we still understand that we're valuable to the world. So I love his model. I find it very appealing. And I didn't think when he reached out to me about what he was doing and said, would you participate? Will you help me figure this out? I thought, well, I'm not going to need that because I'm super high resilient. Like I am a high performer. Why do I need that? Oh my gosh, I benefit too. I've benefited so much engaging with the founders, hearing about their problems, hearing how they're managing their mental and physical health, how they're overcoming some of the challenges that they run in. So that sense of community, that sense of engagement has turned out to be really important. So I would love it if you spent more time on founder mental health.
Yeah, after you said it, I'm thinking, yes. So, but at this moment, let me invite one of our other students, Cameron Reeves, to ask her question about the most difficult part of starting your business. So Cameron, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I was actually gonna ask a question about like something that's beneficial you learned. What is something beneficial you learned early on as an entrepreneur and still sticks with you today, or you still use it today?
Well, Cameron, I talked about the fact that I was, kind of heavily introverted. And I will say that that learning that extroversion has been a really important lesson. I think as a woman in particular too, I was a little reticent. I make jokes about the silverbacks, the leaders of industry, they often tend to be older males with white hair. And I've learned how to connect with those people. I was very intimidated at first. Like, what do I have in common? I don't know where to start the conversation, and so that's something that's really stuck with me, is learning how to connect with people who are very, very different from me, or who maybe I feel a little intimidated by. And I've learned how to do that primarily by, getting to know them and being useful, right? Are they interested in outdoor activities like me? Like I like to paddle. I like to travel. I love to read. And so, connecting with people on in whatever way I can has been a talent that I learned and I've really cultivated and has served me well.
Wonderful. That's, wonderful. Let me ask you the next question. Let's go back to your early life. Tell us something about sort of you growing up, family, community, school. Were there people in your family? I know you said your father has always been a champion of you going into innovation, but were there friends, teachers who played an important role in how your career shaped up?
That's a really great question. I think that I will say, first of all, one thing that really stands out about my background is that I'm an immigrant. Vishal, you know the data on immigrant entrepreneurs. I pass because I grew up in Canada. But coming from Canada to the southeastern United States, I always felt, you know, pretty much an outsider, felt quite different from everybody else. So that's part of it. I think I was raised by an engineer and accountant. So my mother's actually, you know, a public accountant. And so numbers, you know, were always part of the game. And, you know, when I went to college, my dad actually had me prepare sort of a P&L. I had to report on it by semester. I had to forecast, and then I had to report budget to actuals every semester in college. Who knew how useful that lesson would be? It's mattered in every job I've ever had. And then I really think, you know, I had a fantastic mentor in the startup who I'm still very close to. He was a VP of marketing and really helped me kind of understand a technology market and really develop my sensibilities around how to market and sell. And then I would say in grad school, I had a number of amazing mentors. You know them, but Howard Aldrich and Candy Brush. And Barbara Entwistle is another mentor on the research side at UNC, who was really instrumental in helping me think about the world and develop my craft. And even beyond that, all three of them have played a role in sort of my transformation into the CEO role and building and developing, you know, a company. Yeah, I would say that. Had some amazing mentors.
And what about growing up in Canada? Like, was entrepreneurship something that was prized in Canada? We had a guest speaker last time who also grew up in Canada. And honestly, I didn't know you had grown up in Canada. I always took you as you know, grown up in good old USA. So, but our friend last time was saying that Canada is not sort of, entrepreneurship is not that, you know, that sort of prized in Canadian society. What was your experience like?
I would say that Canada has much more of a collectivist mentality than the United States does. So there's a little less of that rugged individualism. I think that's a lot of what drives, you know, our very entrepreneurial society. That said, I think Canada was always very innovative. The culture's always been innovative. It's just that you tend to work together on the innovation rather than going out and, you know, doing the cowboy thing. So I think what I would say is I think Canada is quite similar to the United States, but I think the cultural logic that drives entrepreneurship is a little bit different. And I think the you know, images, the stereotypes that we use to characterize entrepreneurs are really, really very different. And you know, and my Canadian heritage, I lived there till I was 16 years old. So it's very much a part of, you know, my identity and how I think about the world. So I think of it as a super innovative place, personally.
Okay. And you talked about college briefly, but tell us about your time in college. What was your major? Where did you go for your undergrad? Were you exposed to entrepreneurship in college? You know, entrepreneurship is very hot these days on college campuses, but how were things back then?
Yeah, no, I wasn't exposed to entrepreneurship at all. I majored in international studies with a core in econ, and that was a compromise with my dad because I was very drawn to social sciences. I really wanted to be an anthropologist or, you know, archaeologist. That was my big interest area. And my dad said he wouldn't pay for my degree if I did that. And I wanted him to pay. So I compromised. I got my multicultural, you know, Jones kind of met with international studies, lots of sciences. And then the core was where he really wanted me to do business. So by doing econ as a core, that satisfied his need for me to do something useful. And maybe that's part of, you know, why I came out of college, not really knowing what I wanted to do. It was because there was a tension there, right, around being pushed towards business all the time, and not really wanting to go there. And then, of course, don't you know, in grad school, same thing. I ended up choosing sociology over business and over psychology. Those are the three fields I was considering a doctorate in. And I did that really based on the advice of a poli-sci professor who said if he could go back and do it again, he'd choose sociology because the theory is amazing, the methods are amazing, and you can study anything you want. And then I got into that program, and that's probably where I really again, got my grounding in entrepreneurship, beyond the startup, but actually, sort of that system view.
So, Amanda, one of our students, Megan, has a question that's, I think, that reflects sort of something that a lot of college students are struggling with. Megan, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so I was just wondering if you had a personal connection to someone with Lyme disease, and then with that, kind of a follow-up is there a certain entrepreneur that you look up to in the professional world?
Okay, those are great questions, Megan. So when I got into this, I did not have any connections to anyone with Lyme disease or cat scratch disease or any of the associated illnesses where these infections are playing a role. I do now, because the way I approach the again, market creation is really what we were doing. And the way I approached that was really from a social movement perspective. And if any of you who know anything about Lyme disease, you'll know you can Google it, but it's literally called the Lyme Wars. We have a standoff between the medical establishment and between patients and doctors on the front lines who are trying to figure out, why people get a tick bite, get Lyme disease, get treated, and don't get better. So it's like 1 out of 5 people don't get better. It's like a long haul COVID kind of thing. So right now I know lots of patients, and I do have a family member who was affected by cat scratch disease, and I would have missed it if I hadn't been doing what I'm doing. And so, yeah, that's huge. In terms of entrepreneurs who I look up to, I got to tell you, I'm also surrounded by amazing entrepreneurs in the Raleigh-Durham area where my company is. And I work at Babson College, so there are lots of amazingly successful entrepreneurs who remain engaged there. And so I don't really have like one ideal I look up to. I really sort of have kaleidoscope of incredible entrepreneurs, incredible journeys. Obviously, as an instructor, I've taught budding entrepreneurs and practicing entrepreneurs who have been involved in all industries. So I kind of have the industry spread too. I just really appreciate people who have the hubris and drive to start and grow a business, and honor those who experience some success, because most of us don't.
Thank you.
So Amanda, you talked about graduating sort of in this situation from, your undergraduate, where you wanted to do one thing, your dad wanted you to do something else. So then did you go work? Did you decide to go immediately to grad school? Sort of how did you navigate that? A lot of our students are sort of in the same boat. Should I work? Should I go to grad school? Should I go pursue my dreams? Should I go fulfill my parents' dreams?
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about sort of you in that age, sort of making that decision.
Well, as I said, I was a clueless 22-year-old. And by the way, all my friends weren't. They all seemed to have a plan and I didn't. And I remember very distinctly one conversation I had with my father. After graduation, I moved home for the summer, was trying to figure out my next step. I really wanted to join the Peace Corps, but I wasn't eligible because I wasn't an American citizen at the time. And my dad just basically said, you know what? I don't care what you do. You just need to pick something. And for God's sake, you gotta learn how to pay your own bills. And so that was my launch pad. And so that's what I did. I went out and got a job. I actually spent a summer working at a clinical research organization doing clinical trial research. I mean, talk about, foreboding. And then I actually moved up to Canada and I applied for the Foreign Service. So I spent a year living in Toronto, around the corner from my grandmother. I was very lonely, right? I left all my friends. I was so used to, the college experience. There's something going on every weekend. There's always someone to talk to, lots of people your own age. And all of a sudden I'm working at Bell Canada as an assistant in the facilities provisioning department, surrounded by people who had families and big lives outside of work. But it was a great experience. I went through the interview process, decided that, it wasn't something I wanted to do, move every 2 years and live in different places around the world. And then I went home. And the first job I got when I got home, Vishal, was at that startup, at that enterprise software startup, which is where I think the journey really began. And then when I think about this, and I think, I have kids in their 20s, and I still work a lot with students, and I reflect back on my path to finding my why and getting my feet under me. And all I can think is, thank God I trusted the process, right? I think that was part of what I got from my parents was it's not unusual not to know what you want to do at that age. And yeah, a lot of people around me who, like my friends who had a plan, a lot of them abandoned that plan, right? They ended up changing their mind and doing a lot of other different things. And so it's really just about getting out there and doing something and trusting the process.
And so, you mentioned your dad had you write P&L every semester, or, every academic year. But were there any skills you learned like in college itself that you thought were helpful later in your undergraduate? Any skills?
Oh my God. You're not going to like the answer to that, Vishal. I finished undergrad thinking that I wasn't done. Like, I mean, I studied a lot of different things. I would say taking all those econ classes, I knew that I didn't like how economists approach and look at the world. I thought it was ceteris paribus is limited, doesn't capture, what really happens in the world. I feel differently about behavioral economics now, you'll be happy to know, but we didn't really have that. It was really not part of my training. I loved all of my social science history and anthropology and sociology and classics. I mean, I loved all those. I took art history. I loved all those classes. So I think what I really got out of my undergrad was a really good, broad grounding in the world. I was very curious. I love to travel around the world to different places, and I love hearing other people's stories. And that's what I really got from undergrad, right? I learned how to write research papers. I was a very good student, but mostly other than that, it's really just, I have my lifetime friends. I really got my lifetime friends in college and have remained connected to them over the years.
Good, good. Yeah, we sometimes think of, the 18 to 22 age as sort of, this defining phase in your life that's going to, teach you everything and set you for life. And I think a lot of times we forget that is not the case for many of us. And, I don't think it's, we also should put that pressure on the young generation, so it's good to hear that from you as well.
Well, especially today, because when I was going through and you were going through, Vishal, we were surrounded by our friends and a broader community, academic community. Those are the people we're comparing ourselves to. One of the things that I have to remind my own kids about is just because people are doing amazing things on social media or the internet doesn't mean that those are the people you should be comparing yourselves to, right? Like just focus on who you are, where you are, and what's right in front of you. Like that's all you need to worry about. The same way that we can't solve or do things about the terrible things that are happening around the world, right? You can't let that depress you or consume you. You really just have to kind of focus on where you are and what you're doing and what your next step is.
Yeah, I think, yeah, well said. Now we'll sort of come back to your business, the one you're running now. And a couple of students had some very good questions about your business. So Olivia, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I was just wondering why you chose to base your company and research out of North Carolina.
Well, the quick answer there is we're spin out from North Carolina State University, so we wanted to stay close. We have a very close relationship. Two of my co-founders have remained full-time employed at the university, and it's great for them to have a 15-minute drive to the company for meetings, and and we still do new test development. We're still transferring technology from the university into our lab.
Thank you.
And Kobe has a question about your business as well, about funding. Kobe, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Yes. I just wanted to ask, where does the majority of the funding come from for your company?
That is a fantastic question, Kobe, because we took a very unusual approach for life sciences. So working in the diagnostic space, we had the option, the industry's kind of divided into services and product. And a lot of people develop, test or diagnostic advances, and they very quickly want to spin it out into a product. But if you do that, you have to raise a ton of money and push it through FDA, right? And by a ton of money, I'm talking about, 30 to 90,000, sorry, 30 to 90 million dollars is how much they estimate it takes to get an IVD kit through FDA approval now. Because we had the option of launching services, we were able to establish a lab and start selling tests. In other words, we receive samples, we perform the test and report out the result under a different regulatory structure. And that allowed us to get very close to our customers, to our clinicians, right, who order the testing, to the patients. And so from a market development perspective, that was really critical. And also, facilitated really close engagement with advocacy. We've really worked with them to build awareness and to develop medical education and to even, conduct studies and expand the clinical research around these disease areas using our technologies. So I would say that our development to date has primarily been driven by revenue, by non-dilutable funding in the form of grant making, and then just a little bit of equity funding so far. We are fundraising now for 5 million Series A. And this is the first big kind of roadshow or fundraising that we've had to do. And that's good for our shareholders, by the way. We're conserving it, right? It's less dilution is good for shareholders, good for founders.
So Amanda, recently in class, we discussed funding, and I told them that, you're going through Series A funding. Could you maybe explain to them, from you would as a teacher, as an instructor, as a professor, what is Series A funding? How do you decide between equity funding and debt funding? Seems like you guys didn't pursue debt funding. So could you maybe talk to them a little bit about these?
So we have done some debt funding, especially economic development funding. So the grant funding is the best, right? People give you money to accomplish something you want to accomplish. Revenue is fantastic. You sell services, but you have to pay a lot of attention to the production cycle, right? And customer service and marketing and promotion, that kind of thing. When it comes to debt financing, we have used debt financing certainly to purchase equipment to survive COVID. That was absolutely necessary. PPP was great, but we still needed to draw on SBA funding terms in order to survive that. Nothing like your revenue going away to make that urgent. And we've also done some economic development grants really to support development of assays that we could sell right away. So the trick with debt funding is that you're taking on it's just like anything else, right? You're taking on a payment, and so you got to pay for that. And so the trick with debt funding in business is really you have to start making money. So if I buy a new piece of equipment, there's a lot of pressure on me to start earning more money with that equipment so that I can pay off the equipment, right? And that goes for any kind of debt funding. If I get economic development grant, then I want to start earning money as quickly as possible on whatever it is that I funded, because the payments start right away. Equity financing is a little bit different. Going out and raising money from investors creates a whole other layer of work that has to be done at the top of the company, because you are involved in investor relations. So as a CEO, you're wearing lots of hats, right? You've got finance, you've got marketing, you've got operations, then you've got the funding and investor relations that is kind of up there with board management, managing clinical advisory boards or that kind of, and that is very, very time consuming. And so that's something that our approach to financing the company has allowed us to put off for some period of time. But something I understand that as CEO, as we bring investors on board, I have to take care of those relationships, right? I got to let them know what we're doing, where we're making progress. Sometimes I have to deliver bad news, which is not fun. But really focused on those milestones and moving things forward. Does that answer the question, Vishal?
Yeah, but two follow-up questions. First is, could you talk a little bit about Series A funding, Series B, and then
Yeah.
how
Right.
does it lead or not lead to IPO? Could you talk about it?
Right. So, well, first of all, I'll address the IPO question because this comes up a lot. In life sciences, pharmaceutical companies have a path to IPO. Diagnostic companies rarely do. So diagnostic sector is very, on the services side especially, tends to be very consolidated. Like LabCorp and Quest in the United States pretty much dominate. They have 90% of the market share between the two companies, right? And then you have the innovation and the small labs and the other 10%. And so typically it's really M&A. That's your exit in lab services. Manufacturing or product manufacturing side of diagnostics, M&A is still very active there. That tends to be more often the outcome rather than IPO, but IPOs can happen in med tech. And then, pharmaceutical is totally different. They have a lot of M&A very early stages, or they have IPO later. So when it comes to the different rounds of funding that you do over time, and I'll speak to life sciences because it can really vary depending on like technology, like software and tech is quite different from life sciences, quite different from consumer products. But in life sciences, typically we have pre-seed, we have seed, we have Series A, Series B, Series C, and on up from there. And I will tell you, if you're actually out there and trying to fundraise, or if you just want to go and try to learn some of it, just know right now that the number amounts vary depending on the industry, depending on even an industry, subsector or segment can be very different. But the bottom line is pre-seed is, where that's usually your inception funding. So you're looking for, it could be $10,000 to $50,000 just to, get the business incorporated, develop the first business plan, maybe apply for a patent, or get some publications or get a research proof of principle out there. Seed funding, it usually happens when you're getting ready to launch some sort of commercial entity. That commercial entity in life science is often pre-revenue for a long time, right? We had the advantage of becoming revenue positive pretty quickly, but most companies don't. And so seed funding is usually kind of focused on this pre-seed. Series A can still pre-revenue. Series A can still be pre-revenue phase for a lot of life science companies. In our case, we're actually making money and close to break even. So we don't have a lot of burn. And so that money, the investors know when they put the money in, it's literally going to drive sales and expanded menu and a launch of a product strategy. That's unusual. Most companies in our space are usually, raising a B or a C round, so a much higher amount. Again, like I said, the amounts can really vary. Seed and life sciences is often in the like 2 to 5 million range. For us, that's our Series A is 5 million. Series A usually is 10 to 15, so the amounts go up over time. And the value of your company goes up over time. So hopefully you don't have to sell as much equity with each round.
Wonderful. And I think that was very helpful because we did not go in this level of detail in the class in terms of funding. So I think it's very useful that you were able to speak to the students about this. You mentioned PPP funding, and we did touch upon that in the class, but could you briefly share with them what PPP funding is? And sort of the follow-up question is, does the fact that the government during the pandemic was willing to give funding to private businesses sort of to help them, does it reflect that the US government is supportive of new businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurship?
Right. So during COVID pandemic, I'm just going to leave you with it. Start with a statistic here around lab services. A lot of people thought, hey, COVID was really great for laboratories, right? And clinical testing. Well, no, it wasn't, because it only benefited the labs that were doing COVID testing. Everybody else got shut down in April of 2020. The average revenue drop in lab services was 60%. I just want you to think about that for a minute. If you, and lab services runs very skinny margins. So for example, LabCorp has a margin around 20, 25%, right? And so really skinny margins. What happens when half your revenue disappears all of a sudden in 1 month? And so of course there's a scramble to try to find other ways to earn money. That's the typical business response in most companies, the pivot, right, or countries, regions, is to try to pivot. The American government kind of recognized the market disruptions and the impacts on businesses and tried to offset those with different vehicles. So the PPP program specifically was covering payroll expenses for companies in 2 different quarters. So in the first quarter of 2020 and the second quarter of 2020, we were eligible for PPP funding, and we had to file an application that basically showed that we kept jobs. They were trying to reduce job losses. So they were willing to pay money to cover those, cover payroll while we were experiencing those revenue losses. Now, that money didn't help us with other things like making our equipment loan payments or paying our rent or whatever. So employers also came in. I mean, employers, landlords actually came in. Our landlord came in with a rent deferral program. So we were able to defer rent. We had some of our, sort of equipment mortgages, if you can think about it, the same way that mortgage lenders did deferrals. A number of our leasing companies did payment referrals to the end of 2020, putting off the inevitable. And that's where the debt financing offered through the SBA program really became important. And that was, and PPP was sort of part of that program, but not really. It was the emergency injury disaster loans, or EIDLs. That were really important, and basically businesses were in a position where they could draw debt financing at very favorable terms, like a 30-year term with percentage, the 6% interest or less, depending on your qualification through the SBA program. And so a lot of companies drew on that debt funding to get through the end of 2020 to pay, catch up on rent and the leasing once revenue had recovered. And for us, I guess revenue had recovered basically by October was where we were starting to see 2019 levels again. But we have never, revenue hasn't settled. For life sciences industry in general has not settled yet. Since post-COVID, we're still, and how much of that is other market issues, right? Like the recession or concerns about recession, that kind of thing has been really challenging. If you guys are doing any work on the capital markets, you'll know that 2023 was the worst capital market in 20 years. And we're hoping for recovery in 2024. So it's very difficult to raise money right now. A lot of, I could keep talking about this, Vishal. A lot of the investors who had invested in startups in 2020, in 2021, they doubled down. So 2021 looks like this amazing year for raising money for companies, but it was primarily portfolio companies. So companies that had already received VC funding where their investors doubled down. If they were performing, if they'd hit their milestones, they were double downing and keeping them protected, because we're still seeing businesses shut closed down as a result of the COVID impacts on the market.
Oh, wow. That even after so many years.
Yeah, it's still in the GEM data, Vishal. It's crazy. It's still we've kept that question in there. For have you shut down a business? This is all adult population surveys and like 50 countries around the world. Have you shut down a business in the last 12 months and what's your reason for it? And we kept the pandemic question in there. We're still getting responses on it.
Wow, that's amazing. But now let's sort of move towards the future. What are your future plans for the business? You said you're close to break even, but not exactly break even. You said you're revenue positive, but what's your future plans?
Well, so that's a great question. So what differentiates Galaxy in the workplace is that we're focused on sample enrichment. In other words, for direct detection, we tend to use, molecular detection platforms, proteomics, metabolomics kinds of methods. The problem there is for these infections are so low abundance that if we take a tube from a patient, we may only have 1 or 2 copies in the tube. And the odds of actually detecting those with a tiny bit is really low. So with these sample detection technologies, we have 2 prototype assays right now. We have a urine antigen test for Lyme disease that, is In acute patients is almost 100% sensitive, confirms all cases, and compared to antibody testing, which is a standard of care, basically can only confirm about half of acute cases. These are people we know for sure have Lyme disease. And so developing that assay helps doctors basically confirm cases that they would otherwise miss. And that's particularly important for people who only had a tick attachment, didn't have a bullseye rash, or, or had tick attachment, but no other clinical signs, or who've been treated and, and we expect to find antibodies. Now we need direct detection kind of thing. And then we have a DNA and blood test for the cat scratch disease bacteria, Bartonella. Where this allows us to confirm diagnosis in 6 times more patients. So those are our 2 sort of prototype assays that are available clinically right now on a service basis. What we want to do is take those assays and productize them. And we want to take the techniques and apply them very broadly across infection, because this approach of combining sample enrichment with molecular confirmation of some type is not only leads to more sensitive detection for low abundance infections, but can support earlier detection for like a whole range of infections, which I think in the world of COVID, you guys understand. How many times did you have to take that antigen test or PCR test before you tested positive? Our methods will help you test positive sooner. So that's the goal, is really to expand our menu, to build a sales and marketing team, because we have over 1 million ARR. We've had it stable since 2017 and at 1 million or higher in annual revenue. But we don't have a sales and marketing team. So I really want a sales and marketing team to go sell what we have, expand our menu, and then through R&D, and then start pushing, productizing some of these assays and pushing them through the FDA so that we can sell IVD kits to labs around the world to run our assays. That's our goal.
Good. And our best wishes to you as you sort of go to the next phase of your business.
Yeah.
So Amanda, you have 3 kids. What role do you see entrepreneurship playing in your kids' life? Is that something you want for them, or has your own experiences as an entrepreneur sort of, showed you that it's not for them? What do you think?
Well, I might have scared them off of it. It's really, really hard work. My oldest son is sort of famous for saying, Mom, people in my generation just don't want to work as hard as people in your generation. I don't think he realizes there are a lot of people in my generation who never wanted to work very hard either. So I don't know. I think the model's been presented. I think that it's familiar and approachable for them. Whether they'll go off and do something similar, I don't know. My daughter is probably the most focused on the adventurous aspects of the world, but she likes being more on the grant making side of it rather than, on the innovation side, rather than actually in the trenches. And my youngest is just finishing college, so I have no idea where he'll end up. But I will say he's a philosophy and English major, so odds seem high that he'll end up in entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Did you used to take your kids to work when they were younger? Did you sort of say, here's your summer job, in the business?
Yep. Yeah, I've definitely done that. I think when I was in grad school, I took them to campus with me, and they've all been involved in one way or another in the company over time, along with a lot of the kids of friends and colleagues and co-founders. I will say that the internships through the North Carolina Biotech Center, through NC State, UNC, and Duke University, I have had some fantastic interns over the years who really helped develop the company as well.
Wonderful. Now I'll ask Julia to ask you a question. She has a question that I also wanted to ask you about work-life balance, but I'll let Julia ask her question. Julia? Julia, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Yeah, so sorry. The train was going by. I was just wondering, how do you balance your personal life while being an active member on several boards and being a CEO?
Yeah. Well, Julia, I'm not sure I want anyone to follow my model because I do work all the time. But what I try to do is, again, I'm very outdoorsy. I try to every weekend get outdoors. We have a dog. We go to the dog park almost every night. When the kids were younger, it was soccer practice or music practice. And so I would literally go and sit and stay and talk to the parents and engage with the kids. I've always been very involved in school when my kids were coming up. And so, I mean, you just make a priority. I have aging parents now, and I travel to make sure I spend a lot of time with them in these final years. And, so I think that's part of it. I think I think my personal passions really overlap a lot with what I'm doing at work. Particularly for me on the research side. Vishal knows this, but I've done a lot of work on women's leadership and women's entrepreneurship over time. And I would love to do more there. But I think it's get out of the office, enjoy the outdoors, spend time with family and friends. I take a solid 2-week vacation every year where I sail with friends. And so we're off grid. I've done a lot of high adventure through the Boy Scouts with my kids growing up too. So again, off grid is good. Might be hard for you to unplug, but literally we have to balance our relationship with technology, I think. Can't let it dominate. I hope that answers the question.
It did. Thank you.
So Amanda, I mean, you said you do all this. We all have 24 hours. How many hours a day do you actually sort of, you're on your feet doing stuff, whether it's for the family or for the business or for your research?
All of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I wake up every morning around 6 or 6:30, and I kind of go through planning for the day. That's when I often start my day off reading. Vishal, I think something you probably identify with. It's a good time to revise a paper or to do reviews. That gets my brain kind of going. I exercise every morning, so that's the other thing I do. I walk 2 miles at least, maybe do some yoga, and so I start my day off really early. I think those morning hours are really where I kind of take care of myself a little bit, and then the rest of the day is a whirlwind. I'm typically at my desk by 8 or 8:30. Answering emails, launched into the day. I have back-to-back meetings a lot of days. If I'm traveling, I'm often juggling, keeping up with email and calls while I'm traveling around the world for research work. And, I like to cook. So I still try to find time to cook, for my family. That's something I really love and enjoy. Less thrilled about housework, but that's a constant. I don't know. I mean, I just, I think I try to end my day. If I'm not doing the dog park, I try to get off the computer by 7 p.m. If it's the dog park, I think we're usually trying to leave at 5, and then I do a couple more hours of work, usually clearing out email or planning for the next day, or reading later in the day. I instrumentally make myself watch TV. I know that sounds weird because most of us are happy to do that, but I literally have to stop myself from working. And so, I don't know. It's a carousel. It's like a merry-go-round every single day. And then on the weekends, I try to, at least Saturday and Sunday morning, I try not to work or do anything. So it's yoga, it's boating, it's farmer's market, it's playing with the dog, it's hanging out with my family, whatever.
Well, Mason has a very good question. And I'm curious to hear your answer to Mason's question as well. Mason?
I'm sorry, could you remind me of the question I asked?
You asked a question about what advice she would give.
Oh, yeah. What advice would you give a young entrepreneur or young college student coming out of, and kind of in the same position you were coming out of?
Yeah. So I think I would have three pieces of advice. One is put yourself out there. Get out of the office, get off of campus, go experience the community, go try new things, right? The second is, be useful. get to know people, learn about them, find ways to be useful to people. And then the third one is trust the process, right? It's normal to feel clueless at times. You're constantly developing a plan. There's plenty of opportunity to reinvent yourselves multiple times over the course of your life. And a lot of that will happen in the first 10 years after college. You're just trying to find your why, you know, and you can't do that if you're hiding in a room. You got to get out there and, you know, and experience life. I mean, if you get a job and you're just paying the bills, that's great. But, you know, one of the things that I did while I was working for that software startup was I went and volunteered every week at our local women's shelter, right? So I was learning a lot about community service and how to help people find the help that they need to get out of bad situations. I did a lot of other volunteer work as well, trying different things. So, you know, and I think, you know, you probably all learned, but is it something like 60% of people who start a company stay full-time employed where they are? I think my husband's probably the perfect example of the entrepreneur who was full-time employed, but has always had a side gig going on. He's again, programmer, technology. It's always been digitally focused, but yeah.
And I'm sorry, I got a follow up too. You said you were an introvert. What kind of tricks did you use to force yourself to get out and force yourself to meet new people and stuff like that?
Yeah. Mason, are you an athlete?
Well, not anymore, not for college or anything, but I guess
Right.
you say recreational athlete.
But you learned about game face, right? It's all
Absolutely.
about the attitude. And so that's how I did it, is I basically, you know, I basically just put on my game face, got out there. I stumbled. I probably came across as awkward and ridiculous at sometimes, and I just kept moving forward. I just kept trying to do a better job with every interaction. As an entrepreneur, when you're pitching people, literally that's how you find the right pitch, because you have such a diverse audience. You just got to go out there and tell people what you're doing over and over and over and over again, and hopefully you'll you know hit it on the nail on the head a few times, and you get better at it as you go along. But that's the bottom line. I still find it exhausting, but you know, it's part of the job.
So at this time, let me ask other students if they have questions they want to ask you, Amanda. So the floor is open. Anyone who wants to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
I have a quick question I can ask. So I guess as someone I'm a pre-med student, but also doing accounting stuff. So I was wondering, you know, how did you, I guess, take the change from being like hardcore science in the beginning to, you know, shifting that over to taking this larger macroscopic CEO role? Like, what do you like about it, dislike about it? And maybe just describe that a little bit.
Jack, I love that question. So I have to tell you, some of my favorite groups of students to teach, you know, business concepts to, are actually technology students and design students. So at NC State, we have this really fantastic school of design. So what is it that I loved about these students? And I'll tell you, they were so passionate about their topic, right? Whatever their focus was, whether it's medicine or art or technology or whatever their interest area was, that they couldn't wait to get out of the office and go find people to talk about. And they once they learn the how businesses work and the commercialization process, and they become amazing translators. It becomes a superpower. So whatever, and it doesn't have to be like you're pre-med and you're interested in medicine. It could be that, you know, maybe you have a hobby that you're really good at, right? I have a friend who started an outfitters company here in Southwest Florida, where I'm living right now. And she worked in tech, but what she loved was the outdoors. And so that's how she ended up building a very successful business down here. And so that's what I would say. It's just, you know, follow your muse, build on your passion. And you'll become like, it's a superpower, being able to translate the technical aspects of whatever the business is about into sort of plain language for people.
That's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And it sets you up well to be the CEO. Because I think one of the things that really distinguishes people who make good CEOs is their ability to apply a global concept. So you people who like leave school and they go work at a company and they do one little job over and over and over again, they understand their group, they understand their department, they understand their function, right? Finance, marketing, operations, but they don't necessarily understand how what they do fits into the whole organization or even sees the company as an actor or a player, right, in a larger arena. And so I think that that perspective is one of the things that people who combine this deep understanding around a particular topic with general business understandings really are well positioned for, the climb into the C-suite because they have that global perspective. They understand how what their organization is doing contributes to the marketplace or solves that value proposition for a particular customer segment.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions from students?
Yes, you talked about design students. Coming as a public relations major, my question is, what were your marketing and communication tactics, and did you have any campaigns for your company to like get the word out?
Mallory, that's a great question too. You guys are on point today. I will tell you, it was just totally instinct for me. But when we were launching the company, social media was kind of becoming the way. And of course, a lot of it's free. So my focus, and we have fantastic organic reach at our company, which has really provided a foundation and really helped drive the revenue for what we're doing, is to deliver sticky content. So right from again, that goes back to that idea around networking is to be useful. So that's what I applied in terms of, we launched a social media campaign. We knew we had to educate the market and build awareness. And so we started there. What do patients need to know? What do doctors need to know? What questions do they have? What do we know that can answer some of those questions? And that's really where we started. We've done some not a lot on email outreach. We have some customer lists and lead lists, and we generate content and try to repurpose that from social media through email campaigns. What we found in life sciences for actually driving sales, which is always the question you have as a marketer, is actually getting our scientists on podiums at customer-facing conferences, so clinical audiences, and on webinars. And increasingly, that shift has moved away from conferences more to webinars. Being able to, do accredited continuing medical education or CME has been really important as well, because doctors and clinicians have to do a certain amount of training every year to meet occupational requirements. So I would say that it's just really, I still routinely get on the phone with some of our top customers, our clinicians, and ask them what's new in your world. What do we need to know about your clinical experience? Have you come across new things? What's useful or not useful about what we're doing for you? And so finding ways to do that, I think, is often something that falls to marketing.
Thank you.
Amanda, I feel like we could keep asking you questions and we could keep learning from you, but I also have an eye on the clock. So let me ask you this. Is it okay if students reach out to you via LinkedIn or with any questions they have? Is that
absolutely happy to connect on LinkedIn? And certainly if the Lyme disease or vector-borne disease, chronic illness, long COVID stuff resonates with you, happy to engage on those medical topics, as well as generally on entrepreneurship or how to survive, founder mental health, how to survive the startup process.
Thank you, Amanda. And on that note, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time today to talk to our students. And as you can see from the participation, the students enjoyed a lot too. I learned a lot, and our best wishes for your future.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, everyone.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you.